With you.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome everyone to the Education and Skills Policy Development Committee meeting on the 21st of July 2021. A particularly hot day. Fantastic to see. So to kick off with the agenda, could we have any apologies for absence, please? I know from my perspective, Cabinet Member Robert Smith was intended to be here, but unfortunately can't. Gareth?
Yeah. And from Councillor Myers Langston as well, Chair.
Right, okay. Anybody else? No. Agenda item number 2, disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Do we have any? No, there we go. And then we move on to agenda item number 3, which is the minutes of the last meeting. So if I go through them so we can approve and sign them as a correct record if they are correct. Can we go through page by page? Page 1. Any comments, please just say. Page 2. And page 3. And page 4 is just the work plan timetable. Okay, so if we're content, we can agree those. Can I ask someone to move them, please?
Yes, I'll move them.
Thank you, Mike. And second?
I'll second them.
There we are, lovely. Thank you very much. So then we move on to number 4 on the agenda, and this is a session with Professor Christopher Chapman of Glasgow University. And Chris, can I thank you for your time coming along this afternoon? I know we're all delighted to be in a position to hear what you have to say. So in your own time, Chris, whenever you're ready, please carry on.
Okay, thanks, Mike, and thanks, colleagues, for the invitation to speak to you today. What I thought I might do is just take you through a couple of programmes of work that we've been working on within the Robert Owen Centre and in partnership with other partners, really since 2013, when I moved to Glasgow from Manchester. So the first programme of work that I want to talk about is the Network for Social and Educational Equity, which has evolved since 2013 to the present day, and we're now in the position where we're working with all of the schools in Dundee City, for example, and the West Partnership, which is our version of the consortia model, the Regional Improvement Collaboratives, which involves 8 local authorities in the west of Scotland and contains, if that's the right words, around about 35% of Scottish children. So not an insignificant programme of work. The second project or programme I want to talk about is Children's Neighbourhood Scotland, which is our place-based approach that really looks at a more holistic approach to tackling childhood poverty and supporting the development of the voice of young people and tackling poverty and so forth. So I'll take you through those two programmes, and then perhaps we can have a bit of a discussion or conversation. I'm just going to do a little. So this is our new book, which was published last week, which is Educational Equity: Pathways to Success, which is edited by myself and Mel Ainscough, whose work you may know from his time in Wales. Enforced by Michael Fullen, and it really documents our programme of work from 2013 to the current day. So there's that book if you're having sleepless nights, but I think Gareth also said that he'll circulate the links to our two websites, so you can go online and have a look afterwards. I think that he said that they would go around in the minute of this meeting. So where do I start? Well, our starting point is really has always been thinking that schools can't tackle poverty, create an educational system that is both fair and supports all children to achieve their full potential in isolation. So the way that we tend to think about our approach is thinking, yes, at a classroom level, but also within the wider school as an organisation. And we know from the effectiveness literature that what happens at the classroom level accounts for 4 times more variance than what happens at the school level. We also think about how schools can move knowledge, expertise, ideas and practice between schools. So we take a very sort of networked and collaborative perspective in our work. But as I said, the fact that schools cannot achieve or support the development of children on their own means that we have to think about schools within the context of the wider society. So we talk about thinking about how we connect schools with the community and the other resources that can be brought to bear. So we think about beyond schools. So we have these, if you will, sort of 4 perspectives across classrooms, within schools, between schools, and beyond schools. The first programme that focuses really on the with and the between dimensions, the Network for Social and Educational Equity. It tends to be more school focused. And then the second programme that I'll talk about really talks about the connectivity by taking a place-based approach. Now both of these approaches are underpinned by what some call design-based research, which is really research and development. And I've just come from meeting with Mel and our team, which finished on the note, well, actually, we're thinking about sort of 2 sides of a coin here. So we're thinking about our research as university academics, of course, but the primary goal is to support the development of more equitable schools and education systems. And if we're not doing that, then we're not really fulfilling our role as defined by sort of research and development. So this isn't about doing research or the university doing research on subjects on schools. This is really much more about sort of, co-production and working together to use different types of evidence, expertise, experience to develop and test new approaches, whether they be in the classroom, whether they be in the community, or whether they be in the broader public sector or indeed the private sector. So the model that underpins both of these approaches really starts off with analysis of practical problems by researchers and practitioners together. So the first thing we do in both programs is undertake what we call a detailed analysis of context. We then develop together with practitioners and in the case of Dundee and all our projects, local government, and also in some projects, national government. We develop these solutions that are informed really by the existing design principles that are in place. And then we undertake iterative cycles of testing and refinement. We call it either collaborative action research or collaborative inquiry to make changes to the practices that are ongoing in whichever situation we're talking about, but then monitoring the impact of those changes. So, in the sort of jargon, they talk about failing fast. So you recognize if things aren't making a difference very quickly, or if there are a number of unintended consequences or outcomes that you didn't expect. You can adapt and tweak the model by reflecting to produce new sets of design principles, which then is fed back in a feedback loop. So it's an iterative cycle of research and development, which it can be traced back really to sort of the 1940s and the work of Kurt Lewin. So there's a long and established track record of working in this way. We take quite a pragmatic approach. So you might have come across improvement science, which has really come out of health, for example, which has a similar set of principles. But the way that it's being implemented in some sectors is by using small tests of change. And so, for example, in health, clinicians rolling up their sleeves reduces the levels of infection and so forth. Well, what we're working with is complex social systems where things are a little more complex. So in terms of developing effective pedagogies in classrooms or supporting the leadership development of a department or a school, really rests on the social implication or social interactions as much as the technical interactions. So we often use the phrase, this seems on the surface technically quite simple when you talk about cycles of research, but actually it's very socially complex. Children can be in a classroom in body but not mind. That social interaction and the relationship between the teacher and the student in a classroom is crucial if you are to develop an effective learning experience for that young person. So in effect, it doesn't matter what the curriculum is. And Graham Donaldson, my colleague, could have a fit if you heard me say this, but it doesn't really matter what the curriculum is if you cannot engage or motivate a young person. So it's really about recognizing the power of building social relationships. So as I said, the Network for Social Educational Equity is steeped in those sort of traditions of research practice partnerships and the notion that collaborative inquiry and using evidence to make decisions about your practice can lead to improvements in practice, and it draws on learning from an international literature base. This isn't something that's sort of been dreamt up in Scotland. And I can remember working with my colleague Mark Hadfield in Wales on the Masters for Educational Practice, if you remember, which grew on some of the ideas from the research in that extent. The story of the Network for Social and Educational Equity can be, as I said, traced back to 2013. And I think this is really interesting. So it started as a national programme funded by Scottish Government, and what at the time was unique about this programme is that what you had was a collaboration between local authorities, a university, the National Improvement Agency, and schools, with the support of the union and other unions and other key stakeholders, which was really important at the time. And I think it's very hard to bring that quite diverse range of stakeholders together, and each of them bring, I think, a crucial and distinctive contribution to this type of project. So you have the expertise that exists within the local authority from the education officers, quality improvement officers. You have the expertise that exists in the classrooms and the leadership of the school, and then you bring the university in a very applied way. Remember, this is about working with rather than researching on, to support and facilitate at one level, but also bring to bear a critical edge that can ask challenging questions and really challenge norms and assumptions of behaviours and ways of working by putting evidence on the table and asking teachers and people working within the settings to generate their own evidence. And what we've seen over the years, of course, as soon as those involved in working in this way see the difference that it makes, because they have the evidence to demonstrate that they are making a difference, and if they're not, they have a mechanism and a means to make decisions about where they go next. They buy into this. I mean, the one thing that I've learned over the years is that teachers only do things which are practical and useful. They tend to be quite ruthless because they're very busy people. So if there isn't the evidence there, or they don't think it's working, then they stop doing it. And this is something that I've sort of learned, particularly in my time in Scotland, is that as a university, it's really interesting because we're usually contracted on a sort of year basis, although we ask for a 3-year commitment, but we're highly accountable for what we do, and especially given the tightness of resources, we wouldn't be working with people if we weren't making a difference. So if I talk you just very briefly through some of the key principles, I'm conscious it's called a pass before I move on to the second programme. So as I've said, it's a collaborative approach that works at classroom, school, and network level across boundaries. So all of the schools in Dundee, for example, are grouped in partnerships. We call them school improvement partnerships of 3 or 4 schools. They have a member of our team assigned to them. We also work with the education officers in that partnership and the educational psychologists. There is a program of work that's of masterclasses that are laid out over the year, and also a program of sort of high-level leadership seminars for head teachers, local authority officers, and each of the team member from the centre visits their partnership on at least 2 occasions per term and has ongoing communication, obviously virtually at the moment, but we're hoping on the 31st of August we will be face to face, depending on where we are, to support that spiral and that cycle of evidence collecting and implementing new practice. We operate what we call a tight loose system, so we're tight about the principles and the framework, but what's happening in individual schools, classrooms, partnerships might look very, very different. But they're all focused on supporting the development of more equitable classrooms and schools by reducing the achievement gap. And we see that in the widest of senses. You know, I deliberately don't use the word attainment gap. The Scottish government uses. They talk about the poverty-related attainment gap. We talk about achievement gaps. It's underpinned by the principle of commitment and mutual benefit through the creation of leadership opportunities and professional learning of staff. So, you know, one of the principles really is based around your staff is the biggest resource you have, biggest part of your budget as well. But actually, it's really, really important in terms of investing in your staff. If we can create a cadre of the very best teachers and educators, then we're going to create a much more effective schooling. A school and education system. There has to be a commitment to long-term sustainability and capacity building. So, as I said, you know, a 3-year commitment, broadly in 3 phases, seems to have worked quite well. And it's so the first phase is about building trust and relationships. Second phase about embedding and sustaining, and then the third phase really about building for sustainability. So the idea is that we do ourselves out of a job because what you're creating is a sustainable system whereby you build the capacity within the system to improve itself. I mean, lots of rhetoric around the self-improving school system, but a lot of that still feels to me quite top-down and quite heavily dominated. I didn't prepare slides because of the translation issues, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the Network for Social and Educational Equity and what it might look like in practice. If I move on to talk briefly about Children's Neighbourhoods Scotland before we stop. This is a place-based approach across 6 neighbourhood sites. We've got 4 urban, 1 small town and 1 rural. There's a recognition that poverty exists and manifests itself in different ways in different places. So what we're interested in from a research perspective is, you know, what elements of this programme are transferable irrespective of context, and what seems particularly context specific, perhaps in a rural setting that's very different to an urban system. We've taken the learning from examples like children's communities, the Harlem Children's Zone, the Greater Shankill Children and Young People's Zone, Strive Together in Cincinnati. And it's really a distinctive approach to improving outcomes for all children and young people in neighbourhoods with high levels of poverty. It's neighbourhood based and has the empowerment of children, young people and communities at its core. It works to support efforts and services with a number of localities across Scotland, as I've said. It's a complex set of arrangements, a partnership between University of Glasgow and the Glasgow Centre for Population Health. We have a national director. We think it's the only programme of its type that's led by a university in the world, but we're cautious about claiming that. But we can't find anything else elsewhere that is led by a university, and we think that is unique and distinctive in the sense that it plays to the university's civic engagement agenda, but also allows us to bring to bear some of the resources and wider resources that exist within the university that wouldn't be as readily available or accessible if it was run by a third sector organisation, for example. It has two areas of activity. The first is the sort of the design and development activity, which, for example, we train up children and young people within the communities using a capabilities approach as co-researchers to research into the issues that are important to them and then feed into local policy making and try and get the children and young people's voice heard in the communities to bring about changes to services. And we also take what's known as a sort of collective impact approach, which means that we have not only a research team working in each of our six sites, but we also have a local coordinator who is half funded by the locality and half funded by Scottish Government, whose job really isn't to inject a load of new projects. I mean, some of the areas we work in have been the most intervened areas or neighbourhoods in the country. So you can think about Bridgeton and Dalmarnock, for example, and you can think about Commonwealth Games, you can think about Celtic Foundation, you can think about Clyde Gateway, and you can think about all the third sector organisations. The last thing they need is another pet project or the university coming in as a pet project. What our local coordinator does is works with those who are working on the ground to try and create synergies and break down the silos in service provision that exists. So ostensibly, instead of different services at worst pulling in different directions and being counterproductive with each other, or perhaps, as tends to be the norm, they're all facing in the same direction, trying to do the same thing, but are relatively siloed. What we try and do is add collective impact by making sure you get more bang for your bucks, by aligning them and making them mutually reinforceable. And this can't be done on thin air, which is why the local coordinator is so important. And again, to go back to the design-based research, we have a research team that is collecting data and information on the types of activity that is going on within the neighbourhood. I mean, that's a sort of whirlwind tour, I guess, and it's 22 minutes past 4, so I probably have my 20 minutes. The two websites, I'd encourage you, if you're interested or you'd like to find out more, to have a play around those. You'll see there's lots of resources on them. So a lot of our publications and frameworks and guides about how we work with the children and young people as co-researchers. At the moment, we're making a film because obviously it's the middle of the summer break here in Scotland. Sort of, again, putting children's voices, at the centre of this community work in an attempt to influence and advocate their role, particularly with UNCRC being enshrined in law. So, and I was really interested to note that play is something that the Welsh do really well, and I think we do less well. I understand that play is enshrined in law in Wales, and that's an area that we're trying to develop, particularly around sort of outdoor learning and thinking about how you can use different spaces in the community in different ways, and our thinking is constantly developing, and we're playing around with ideas linking to sort of the well-being economy, and so how do you grow a well-being economy? Well, presumably you have to start from the bottom up and get children and young people thinking about what well-being looks like, particularly in a post-COVID situation, and then what does economic and health and well-being, prosperity look like as we navigate our way through the current situation. But I'll stop there, and happy to take any questions or have a conversation. So thanks, Mike. It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I think.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. I feel a bit breathless, to be honest. There's a lot of information there, and I've made so many notes here, and I can see my colleagues nodding. I can see brows furrowed. I could see raised eyebrows, questions appearing in people. So can I open this up to everybody, and then I'll just make some points as we go forward, as appropriate as chair, to try to bring things together. But can I ask colleagues for comments initially, please? Lyndon.
Great. Could I say, Chris, thank you very much. That was really interesting and engaging. I picked up one of the things you said about stakeholders together, and we almost have an ideal opportunity in Swansea there, because we've got something coming up called the City Deal, which is we're working through now, which has got Welsh Government, UK Government, Swansea Council, plus the private sector as well. So there's a real opportunity for that sort of engagement to take place within that sort of model. I don't know if you think, what do you think?
Yeah,
Your thoughts?
no, I would absolutely agree. And when we started off, I wrote a paper for Scottish Government because I was seconded to them as their sort of senior academic advisor at the time. They said, it's a really good idea, Chris, but go away and show us proof of concept and that this can work. And you know, it seems to me that the private sector have been largely ignored in more traditional efforts. And you know, I was really surprised. You know, I'm not some sort of neoliberal capitalist. Far from it, as you can imagine, probably as a social scientist and academic. But Virgin Money didn't give us any money, but they were really supportive. So you know, I think support and resource comes in many shapes and forms. So they did things. They have like it's almost like a gentleman's club in the centre of Glasgow, but I can't remember what they call it, but it has some public space. So you know, kids from our schools and from the youth theatre group were going and using Virgin Money space. Greg's the bakers. We had to work through all sorts of bureaucracies to find ways to get sort of sandwiches that were being left over at the end of the day to get into sort of schools and playgrounds. So I was just really surprised that the openness and the level of interest and support that we got from the private sector. Bailey Gifford, a big law firm, they were one of the first people to stump up some cash, and that they paid for one of our researchers, because you know, at the outset this was being done on sort of academic goodwill and the belief that this might be something that could be really important. And to be frank, it was the private sector that stuck their hands up first. To be fair to Glasgow City Council, Director of Education also backfilled a head teacher's post, so the head teacher could come out and work with our local coordinator. So it wasn't only local authority, but it was about bringing those different types of resources to bear in what we felt were quite a new and creative way. And it sounds like you've got the opportunity to do something that perhaps could be very exciting by bringing those sort of diverse strengths together in ways that you know, perhaps haven't been quite as forthcoming in the past, particularly in a sort of pre-COVID environment. You know, I think it's been a game changer, hasn't it? And I think it's made people really question their values and to think about what's important to them, you know, both personally, professionally, but you know, also what they want for society. I
think that's right, Chris. I think it's an interesting one. I think we've always had that divide between the public and the private, you know, and in the pandemic, we've seen a blurring of those traditional boundaries. I think in Swansea alone, colleagues would correct me if I'm wrong, but we've distributed over £100 million to local businesses, well over £100 million to keep people's doors open, to keep people in jobs, you know. What we've seen is an energy and an enthusiasm for change and thinking differently. So I agree with Councillor Jones, with Lyndon, in saying that there are those opportunities, and we're seeing them taken forward in a very positive way, with the concentric circles of government for the national, the Welsh national, the UK national, the local government, working with all partners. It's a very interesting key point. Thank you, Lyndon. Can I go to, as I wrote down there, Helen Morgan-Rees put her hand up. So can I go to Helen next, please? Helen is our Director of Education, Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, Chris.
Hi, Helen.
Yeah, very interested in what you described, your second programme in particular, in terms of the children's neighbourhood in Scotland. I heard you say about the local coordinator, and I was very interested in what you said about working to try and create synergies and collective impacts and having more bang for your buck. And in terms of that impact, what were the actual outputs in terms of the project or programme, or are you still waiting to see what the actual impact is?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen numerous impacts. So in terms of engagement in school, confidence of young people. We've got various measures that highlight that. Of course, you know what I'm going to say next, that this isn't a quick fix. We're dealing with wicked intergenerational issues here. I talked about in the Nessie programme this being a social process, but what we're seeing is resources being leveraged into communities in ways that haven't happened before. So if I think about Rigside, our rural community, you go from one extreme in the east end of Glasgow to Rigside, where there's basically nothing there. There's a school, and there's issues around transport links. We've got a local coordinator sort of working to provide access to different spaces to get children and young people moving around. We've got them working with different community members, or opening up different types of spaces, from all sorts of things. From this is where I get conflicted, because on the one hand I say this isn't about new projects, but of course what happens is when you do your analysis of impact, as well as trying to bring synergies together and add value, you also spot gaps. So in Rigside there are obvious gaps. And so we are beginning to work with the local authority in particular. Tony McDade has been really supportive and influential, really, in bringing the right people together in the room. So we've facilitated the renting of a space to bring sort of food banks into the area. And also, I can't get into the detail of it because I'm too far away from the ground, so apologies. But mitigating the impact of stigmatisation, which I think can be a real issue, particularly in rural areas. So there are sort of short-term impacts that you can see where we've made a manifest difference to what's going on in the ground. But in the same way that Nessie is attempting to build itself out of a role, if you can build the capacity within the community, the idea is that at some stage down the line, 5-10 years time, that you will develop the capacity within the community to be able to sustain itself and its future direction. So I don't know if that helps. We think about sort of short term, which seem a bit piecemeal to me, but actually there's a longer term agenda here. And of course, because of COVID, we've seen all the data's, and you know this better than me, all the data suggesting that it's our most disadvantaged children and young people that it's had the most impact on. So we're seeing the health and well-being agenda being a key part of our next phase of development, and tying that into growing a well-being economy, I think is really important. And yeah, just a massive challenge which shouldn't be underestimated. So I'm not sitting here saying that children's neighbourhoods or Nessie has all the answers. It doesn't, because what happens is you unturn a stone and you find a new set of issues. So it almost feels like you're always running to keep up with the tide. But I can show you very elaborate theories of change and that give you those sort of short, medium, and long-term outcomes. But it feels like a massive task at the moment, I guess. And yeah, I don't know.
Thanks, Chris. I had contact quite recently with the Wales Centre for Public Policy, with a dynamic environment. And I think that from what I got from what you said there, this is building bridges between universities and democratic structures and with communities. So we're all in it together, trying to get people in around the same table and considering the evidence and acting in accordance with the evidence. I can see hands up here, but I did want to say that the engagement of children and young people with evidence gathering and the process of change was music to my ears, in the children's rights context, but it's the right thing to do. At what age, Chris, Have we got a full range of ages involved, appropriate engagement with the children, or have we got a nice connection of 3 or 4 clean, nice, polite, well-spoken children that we use whenever we want to do a consultation?
No, just the opposite. I mean, given the communities that we're working with, we're working with some really challenging contexts and children that face multiple and myriad of challenges in their lives. And by definition, we're working with schools that serve our areas of the highest levels of disadvantage. So I mean, I don't know how well you know Scotland, but if you think about, and whilst it's a national programme, it's no coincidence that we're weighted very heavily to working in the West Coast. So Drumchapel, Bridgeton, Dalmarnock, Clydebank, St Mungo's School was one of the secondary schools that we're working with some primaries in Clydebank. So, and these aren't hand-chosen sort of special pupils, far from it. And our researchers have learnt a lot. That's we're very lucky. I was a teacher by background, and our previous sort of national director was a senior education officer beforehand in working on the Scottish Attainment Challenge within Education Scotland. Hugely talented person. They've just moved on, and we've just appointed another super person, Rachel Cooper, who's come from Inspiring Scotland and Thrive Outdoors, who's just the right person to take this to the next level of development. But it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, but mostly the bad and the ugly. And I spent my teaching career working in these types of schools in Birmingham, and there's a moral commitment to working with these children and young people that goes right across the programme. Actually,
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. Can I go to Mike Lewis, please? Councillor Lewis next.
Hello, Chris. First of all, thank you very, very much for giving your time this afternoon. It's been quite informative and giving us an overview, really, of the process of looking aimed at improving the education and social improvements of the area. Just to pick up what Helen said earlier, really educational lacks. I assume these act as liaisons between schools to share good practice. I'm just thinking, and this may be something that this committee could look at, because I know that we've got lacks that do different wards in the area and look at everything in the ward, but I don't think we've got an education lack. We've got lots of other things, but am I right in assuming that this is what they do?
Sorry, forgive my ignorance. A lack is.
Local area coordinator.
Okay. I'm not sure. How your roles of your local authority coordinators are defined, but our local coordinators reside in what we call an anchor organisation. This could be a school, it could be a youth club, it could be a housing association, for example, and they're really what in the literature you call reticulists. They're people that are very switched on. They come from a range of backgrounds. They have high levels of social emotional intelligence. They can get things done. They connect people. So they're the sort of the glue that holds things together. If that makes sense. And while on the one hand, as I said, it's not about projects or doing extra work. They sort of horizon scan, and so for example, there might be an intervention that's going on in the locality, but nobody can really get a handle on whether what the impact it's having or not. We say, oh well, actually, we've got some resource within children's neighbourhoods. We could evaluate that for you. That's not to say that, you know, a major part of our role is, you know, doing evaluations of other people's work, but it's about being very pragmatic and providing support in areas that are needed depending on the local context. So their role looks quite different. So what happens in Dalmarnock and Bridgeton, that's very different to what happens, as I said, in Rigside. Our local, they also form, there's 6 of them. They also form a network themselves, so they share the learning across the sites. So that's a really important. Our sites aren't working in isolation, and we're also plugged into the UK Communities Network. So they're whilst they're inward looking in their own sites, facilitating, bridging, brokering, providing support, spotting opportunities where necessary, perhaps bringing in the wider resource of the university to do something on a local basis. They're also outward looking across the 6 sites and then beyond across the UK as well. So I don't know if that gives you a flavour of the sorts of things they can do.
Yeah, as I say, I was looking for something more specific because obviously we're a PDC, which is a policy development committee, and we are trying to develop policies that would enhance our education system, not now, but in years to come. Yes, and taking an overview of what you said, yes, a lot of those things could be incorporated in some of our decisions in the future.
I mean, I think what's really interesting is how you define a neighbourhood. So if you're taking a place-based approach, I mean, it seems to me that we've got a sort of myriad of different types of boundaries. So and again, I use the word pragmatic quite a lot. We've taken quite a pragmatic approach because people aren't bounded by community, and how people define their community can be quite different. So you know, Helen, we have children crossing boundaries the whole time. So we think about our neighbourhoods as being sort of semi-permeable, and I think and whilst that has many advantages on the one hand, it also creates a tension on the other hand, of course, because then, you know, when you start talking about hard measures and baselining, it becomes really problematic. We have different data sets for different things that cross different boundaries.
Thank you very
and then you try and get a data sharing agreement between different services, and that's another issue.
And some. So thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Chris. You know, I think we see often people being labelled. You know, even though you might have many links and you cover quite a geographical area in your day-to-day life as a child or an adult, you get labelled sometimes with where you're from, and that can be very detrimental, I think. Helen, can I come back to you, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on the local coordination element, really. I know you referenced Mel Ainscough when you spoke, Chris. Mel is very familiar to me. I've worked with Mel, and if you've had a conversation with Mel about Swansea schools, he will have already told you how collaborative Swansea schools are. So on that respect, on that front, really, we've got a heavy emphasis on schools as learning organisations here in Swansea, and also as learning communities. And with that emphasis, we've created very strong networks across a range of topics, be they school evaluation, be they curriculum, be they wellbeing networks. So we've got a good kind of, I would say, a web really of networks in place. And I'm not saying that we've cracked it all in Swansea. We've still got work to do, but that facilitation of networks and sharing of practice across our communities, because if you know anything about Swansea, it's quite diverse in terms of the city itself. And if you look at our secondary schools, you can see there's quite a divide in terms of the nature of our schools on the east side and the west side of Swansea. So you can glean from that really that some of the work that we are engaging with our networks, our role as a local authority is to facilitate these networks, and we're very keen to promote the evidence-based approach to anything that we do with our schools. And we've obviously worked with the Education Endowment Foundation, and we've also worked with the University of Durham. Professor Stuart Keim, I think his name is, probably got his surname incorrectly. But I think on that basis, what we're trying to do is to promote this evidence. And I think the link with the University of Durham takes us across 74 nations, not just Wales and the UK, takes us on an international footing in terms of literature review. So I think some of the existing connections we have are going to serve us well in the future, but it's always good to learn about other nations in the UK as well. So it's fascinating really when you talked about some of the communities you referenced in Scotland. Obviously they probably have got some, you know, connections in terms of their demographics with our Swansea schools as well. So making those links is always going to be useful. And obviously we had, not such a long time ago, the Schools Challenge Cymru that Mel Ainscough was involved with. So some of our most kind of challenged schools in terms of context, they were given additional monies to try and promote, you know, the issue of equity. And we have the Pupil Development Grant in Wales and have had it for such a long time now. But that Pupil Development Grant is absolutely pivotal in ensuring that schools see themselves not just as educators, but as conveners, so that they can champion the needs of their children and ensure that they can convene the best possible advice, not just from their best resource, their teachers, but also from other community resources as well, and bringing in people to either mentor or champion or support learning in the schools. But I think this is a fascinating topic, and I think it's really important in terms of our recovery and the wellbeing agenda and where we are currently because of COVID. And how we move this on in terms of our policy making in the future, because the more we can collaborate with key delivery partners, the better.
Yeah.
Because as you said right at the top of your presentation, we can't do it alone, can we?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, just thinking about the sort of the recovery, and we're being very careful about the language we're using. And I think there's, you know, a real tendency to look at recovery through a sort of a bit of a deficit model. You know, it's all about learning loss and attaching, the EEF play their role in this, to be frank. 6 months of learning loss in between years X and Y. I think we need to be very careful about how we communicate with our children and young people, and how we provide them with the opportunities that they require to move forward after what has been a particularly stressful 18 months. I mean, for what my sins, one of my roles is on the sort of the expert advisory group for education and children's issues for Scottish Government, and we just see data after data after data, particularly 16, 17-year-old girls and the impact that it's had on their confidence, self-esteem. It just seems to me a group that that should be flourishing, should be experiencing all the rites of passage, whether it be the end of year prom or 17-year-olds moving on to university, as is in the case in Scotland. They're not going to be vaccinated, and I think we just I just wish policymakers would be a little more careful and sensitive about their language. And I think on the ground we can play an important role in messaging the way that we need to go forward. And if you've got those networks in place, and one of the things that Mel often says, the most successful schools are members of many clubs. It's not about being a member of one network. It's about different networks for different purposes, and sharing that expertise and those shared values. And I think, as I said, really importantly at this time, that common language about how we move forward in light of what's happened shouldn't be underestimated, and I think it is. I think we use language pretty glibly, actually.
Absolutely. I think our term in Swansea, I think we've got a recovery plan for the whole council called Achieving Better Together, which is it's a good subtitle for the recovery plan. But I think speaking to colleagues, head teacher colleagues, teachers in schools, they very much want to see this as a resetting of education, and you know, building on the opportunities that COVID has given as well, not just seeing it as a deficit model. So it is important how we use our words.
I mean, I think that's really interesting, the whole resetting idea, because I think the window is open, but the window will only be open for a short period of time. And you know what I see glimpses of, not in any one particular system, so it's not a reference to Scotland, is you know the forces of conservatism wanting to return to the way things were, and you know that I think that door or that window will close unless we're really agile. And you know, I think there are some fantastic things that have happened, despite you know the context. But I can see you know resetting back to the old normal if we're not careful. And I think that's a real challenge for systems. Like, you know, we have a set of networks in Chile, and I think about Chile for example. There, but so I think that's an interesting line of discussion.
Clear opportunities. There are clear opportunities to offer reassurance to young people that we've had to do what we've done in the last 18 months. We are where we are. As we go forward, we want children and young people to feel cosseted, supported, and assured that they will realise their potentials. We can't do much about proms. You know, we can't go back, and that's a shame. We haven't got a time machine. But as we go forward, you will realise your potential. One of the things I'm interested in, I know I'll have a chat soon now with Hannah Lawson about High Street Centre of Swansea issues, is offering reassurance to young people to explain to them how the education system works and what opportunities there are for you post 16. You know, to set a pathway, to say, look, that pathway is this, that, and the others, to offer clarity and assurance there. Lyndon Jones has got his hand up. Lyndon, please.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, again, thanks. I was looking forward to this, and I have to say, not disappointed. It's been really, really good. One of the just a comment on a thing that you just mentioned, and I think we almost need to think the unthinkable. And as we go forward, nothing should be ruled out in many ways. But one of the phrases that you used, or you used about these words in any case, and that is, children can be in a classroom in person, but not mind. And I think that's one of our big challenges, and so important for us all to remember as we move forward, because if we break that, then we make a huge difference. And I shall remember that phrase.
No, thank you.
Have we got any other questions for Chris? I'm conscious that we're coming up towards 5 to 5 now. Any other questions? Any others? Chris, we've already, through Gareth, had the link shared on the chat here, which is great. And Helen shared some other things I've just seen pop up on the screen there. I don't want to keep thanking you, but I mean, that, as Lyndon said, you know, has been very beneficial indeed. It really has. There are many takeaways here for us. I think Helen has alluded to local excellence in our 93 schools, and it's something that we are very proud of. But we are where we are. We have to build, you know, and help children to recover and achieve. The big word here seems to me to be understanding what we're looking at. Be led by the research and by the data. I had a great conversation yesterday with our Deputy Chief Executive, who spoke about people who would not have traditionally found themselves on a list of deprivation, you know, the old indices of multiple deprivation, finding themselves in very challenged circumstances. So you are the business owner and the business is closed. You are the professional and you've lost your job. You found yourself, you worked from the age of 16, of the first time at 45, you found yourself unemployed. So those challenges for families, as you say, it's not for the school to solve, but the wider community issues are very pressing in our kind of drum chapel type communities in Swansea, but in other communities. We do need to take a whole Swansea approach, I think, as we consider the issues looking forward. Chris, thank you very much indeed. I can assure you that I've been in touch, and my copy of your book is on order. I was going to have it here and show you, but it hasn't been received yet. But it's on order. And if you don't mind, Chris, we'll keep you posted about our progress as we go forward. I think you've given us the courtesy of your time today, and we much appreciate it. But we'll keep you posted as we go. Helen, anything you'd like to close with?
No, nothing from me, Chair. Thank you very much, Chris. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, and
Chris,
you and everybody.
Thank you. You're more than welcome to stay for the end of the meeting, Chris, if you want to. If not, we thank you and we'll see you again.
Not at all. I'll let you have your meeting in private. But thanks very much for the invitation, and yeah, hopefully we can stay in contact. You've got my email address. I'm happy for you to share it around if people want to be in touch.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Helen has shared a link on the chat there. If people haven't seen it, there's a link to Chris's website, and Helen's shared a link with My Choice Swansea as well. So going back to the agenda now, we're moving on to agenda item number 5, the work plan. Now, I'm going to pinch a word from Helen here. This is organic. What we don't want to do is to set our agenda for the year, so we want to take a more measured approach, if you like. So from where we are now, I know in the past we've discussed a range of issues to do with vulnerability, about statistics, about accessing the data and understanding the data, looking at links with communities, all communities in Swansea, looking at behaviour patterns, attitudes to education and choices, etc. All building on previous work that the PDC has looked at through our officers. Substance misuse, and of course being led by what works. So can I go to Helen now? For logic, Helen, for me, is the next step for us to look at this evidence-based? Would that be the next focus for our next meeting in September, do you think?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful what we're examining in terms of being true to our original kind of goal as a PDC. And I think we did set out to explore the concept of community learning mentors, community learning champions. So, if there is evidence that exists around the concept of community learning champions, then it would be a rich source, I guess, in terms of informing our next meeting. But I'm not sure who can access that information or where to find it. I'm not so familiar with the concept of a community learning champion, other than what I've heard in a little bit of detail from Chris there in terms of his work in Scotland. But I couldn't say that I'd be in a position to actually do the research myself.
I could look at this with Gareth. I'm aware of a number of different sources in the context of what's more widely called in different fields, community development officers or community workers, learning, the local area coordinators that Mike Lewis spoke about there, and the concept from Eileen Conn in Birmingham University of community practice and looking at communities as spaces of opportunity. But before we get to that, we've got to understand the community themselves. So the next step then, looking at the evidence base and linking this to learning champions with this kind of role of the thread that runs throughout is coordination, Helen, and looking beyond the school environment, lowering the barriers between the school, the community, voluntary organisations, etc. So shall we set an agenda then based on the discussion that we've got so far? If the committee has got ideas, please share them. But other than that, we could set the agenda up to Christmas based on what we've established from Chris today and previous discussions. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think, Chair, there's a strong kind of impetus for us to look at existing practice in Swansea before we dive deeper into looking elsewhere. And I think, as a council, we're a learning organisation. We want to open our doors and windows and learn and share our practice as well.
Yeah.
But I think from an education perspective and schools in particular, we really need to understand what's already going on in our schools. Particularly those who are facing the most challenge on this theme, and how they already use their community to help you know, with learning within their communities, and also how they learn from research themselves, because a lot of the work we've facilitated from an education officer perspective in Swansea has been to ensure that schools are not just applying methods on a whim, they're actually using evidence-based practice, they're using pedagogical practice in terms of quality teaching and learning. And when we talk about quality teaching and learning, we mean enriched quality experiences. We don't mean just what's in the classroom. We mean the wider enriched curriculum as well, which is, you know, obviously to be gained from the community. But the concept that's most important is how are they mentoring and championing learning and using community resources to that end. So I think it would be a good opportunity at some point in the autumn term to invite a couple of schools to see what's already happening.
Can I selfishly suggest the school from the Cocket Ward? Is that selfish?
Well, one of
Okay.
our most challenged school, you know, Dylan Thomas Community School, would make perfect sense as a starting point.
Lovely. And we've got some lovely illustrations in the context you've alluded to there. Bev?
Yeah, thank you. I think what we do well in Swansea is work within our clusters. That is a good opportunity there where we share good practice. And obviously those clusters then work with the comprehensive school that they feed into. And I think it works really well. You usually find there's one person in each cluster that would lead that. So that could be a source of where we would get some of our information from, possibly. But I do think we are good at sharing good practice in Swansea. I really do. But it could be worth us going to some of our clusters and trying to find out, you know, what is working there and what isn't. Because they are working more together as groups now. We're not working individually as schools.
Excellent. Thank you, Bev. Any other suggestions? Okay, Hannah, I noticed you were typing, but then the typing stopped. Was it a comment? There was something coming, I could see.
That's very observant of you, Mike. I was just actually going to ask you if we have, well, it's kind of two questions really. It's about which schools in Swansea are facing the biggest challenges. How do we have up-to-date information about which of the schools are facing the biggest challenges? And the second part of the question was how they're measured. I know we have things like we measure some things along terms of free school meals and things like that, but are there other factors that we measure in terms of a school being challenged? So that was what I was typing, so I don't need
Lovely. Thanks, Hannah. That's helpful. Helen, for me, Mike Jones in education. Mike is mindful of information about the data. Have we got data to be able to flesh out some of the queries that Hannah raised there about understanding the evidence base of our most challenged communities? And are we seeing like a demographic change through the pandemic? Are we seeing that some schools that might be sort of heading into the challenges not previously seen?
Yeah, certainly. So the basic kind of proxy indicator is free school meals still, and we know throughout the pandemic that the application for free school meals has increased. So we've got a far greater number now than we did 16 months ago in terms of those eligible for free school meals. We know that. And indeed, Mike Jones, our data officer, has got a rich seam of information. He's also got, below the kind of high-level data on free school meals, he's got some vulnerability data on pupils as well. So obviously we can share some anonymised data around schools that have got a large number of vulnerable pupils. So that provides us with the challenging context in that respect. But certainly, you know, it's the challenge faced by schools are very often those in relation to socio-economic issues. We know that child poverty in Wales is at 30%. We know that several of our schools in Swansea are facing real difficulties around, you know, the kind of adverse childhood experiences as well. and we know that there is challenge around certain needs that children have, and there is no demographic for those needs. An example would be autistic spectrum disorders, a learning need. There's no demographic for that. So you can cut and chop challenge in whatever way you like, really. But we always seem to go back to that proxy indicator of free school meals. But I think it's a tip of the iceberg, really, in respect of so many challenges that children and young people face. When we heard about the adolescent girls there from Chris earlier on, we're getting emerging issues, emerging challenges that we didn't know existed, particularly before COVID, and some of them were at a low level. We're getting schools with high number of exclusions as well. So that could be an indicator of challenge, of future kind of issues around behaviour in schools. So I think we've got plenty of indicators to help us with that examination of challenge. Yeah.
When we look at that, Helen, I like the phrase basket of indicators. You know, I think a lot of Mike, he's a first-class officer. He is brilliant. But sometimes I've met with Mike on occasion and my hair stands on end because the data is overwhelming. You know, it's so much. It's like, oh, wait a minute. So do you think it'd be possible for us to collate data, maybe around free school meals, and changes in the data in the last maybe 2 or 3 years? So we see in pre-pandemic, in pandemic, and then as it's impacted, because that would give us a clearer picture of what's going on in Swansea, perhaps, as an evidence base for us to start from. Then that can lead us then, as Bev says, to look at clusters and the brilliant work that we know goes on through the school clusters. And then to engage directly with the schools there.
Yeah, I think that would be sensible. I know at one stage, Dylan Thomas had the second highest number of free school meals in Wales.
Yeah.
So, you know, we know that there's distinct challenge there in terms of the context of the school. And as Bev said, the work of clusters in the Dylan Thomas cluster as well is absolutely relevant. And it might be good to include both secondary and primary or the whole cluster in coming to talk to this committee.
That's excellent. Thank you, Helen. Mike Lewis.
Yeah, just one last question. It is to Helen. It is in the light of all our previous discussions now, Helen, vis-a-vis pupils losing out on education and perhaps socially losing out because they've grown past their education time they're in education then. Have education had any portion of this new recovery fund that we are promoting as a council?
Not yet, but we do have a wish list and there will be a clear and transparent officer process to ensure that education's requests are considered. Okay, so that's potentially we'll achieve that position by the end of August. But what I would say is that the funding in terms of grant has bypassed the local authority in essence and gone to our schools. So we've had almost £5 million worth of additional grant around many of the themes to do with recovery and education coming to us as a local authority to be passported out to our schools. So the schools have been enriched financially to deal with recovery, but as a local authority or as a directorate, we haven't had a specific resource yet, other than, of course, the usual hardship fund, which you know about in terms of additional costs and things that you needed to deal with COVID. So we've had that additionality in the hardship fund. And I think it's been confirmed that that hardship fund will exist throughout this financial year as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. It's very informative. Thank you.
Thanks.
Very interesting. I think that's, I can't see any other hands held up there at the moment. It's nearly 5:10. Have we got any other comments and queries? I mean, for me, that was very interesting indeed. I think that Chris alluded to the complexity that he's been involved with. And his breadth of experience. There's no easy answers here. We're on a journey. So our role, again, I use the word coordination and facilitation. I mean, that seems to be the challenge that Chris is grappling with up in Scotland there, in the most disadvantaged communities, with the most vulnerable pupils. but in all communities, there are challenges there. I think my fear is that some of those great challenges for some children could be hidden because we're not used to seeing some children, some schools, some communities as in that disadvantaged category. So the impact of the pandemic in that context, in the economic context, could be devastating for many families, and we're not really that aware of at the moment, perhaps. That's my concern. I'm sure we'll get closer to this as we see the evidence base and the data coming through. Lyndon?
Yeah, Mike, I agree, because in some of the wealthier communities, what you're finding is that families could be asset rich, if you like, but cash poor because they've got huge mortgages. And all of a sudden, the pandemic has changed their dynamic, and they are finding it more challenging. So even in wealthier communities, you are getting that sort of challenge. I'd also reiterate the point of the brilliant Dylan Thomas School, because as you know, the scrutiny committee did visit, and you were part of that. And pupils actually took us round in teams, and wow, what a great ambassador each of them was for that school. It was so impressive to see what they had to do. And similarly, other schools, all schools are doing a great job. But another one we visited was Pendrahafod, and the great job they were doing around NEETs, and how they were involved in business and how they were getting people in there to help them do their CVs. It was purely inspirational.
I agree with that, Lyndon, and I think that when we think about Mr. Goulding, the new chairperson, the new head teacher chairperson, the new head teacher at Pendrahafod, as a local boy, as a Pendrahafod school pupil, and what an example of success there. And I think looking at that, the school and Dylan Thomas, for me, would be the starting point. To be honest, I know we've got many schools in Swansea. We're not being exclusive, you know, but two great schools to look at as a starting point and to be led from there. Okay, everyone, have we got any concluding comments? Is there anything else that we need to look at? I think we've gone through the agenda. So if it's okay with you now, we've got those key ideas. We set the agenda, we'll set the work plan in place. Helen, maybe up till Christmas now, do you think, from September on? I think we've got enough there to go in a logical process from September onwards. So the date of the next meeting is the it's the 15th of September 2021 at 4 o'clock. Date for your diary. And if there's nothing else, everyone, can I thank you all for your questions, for your insights, and go and enjoy the sunshine. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers, Mike.
Thank you.
Cheers.